It's, as you know, called Planning and Winning a Mini Campaign. Can everyone hear me okay?
They're muted, but I can hear you. So if you cannot hear Ian, please let us know in the chat box and we'll make some adjustments.
Okay. Well, my presentation today, folks, is based on 27 years of fundraising experience. I've been involved in 3 comprehensive campaigns over my career and then many mini campaigns. I believe in the circular that was sent out earlier. We identified learning objectives as being how to identify qualified prospects, how to recruit effective volunteers, how to make a successful solicitation, and then the effective stewardship that's required. So I think it'd be probably good for me to quickly describe what I would consider a mini campaign. People do this differently, but I view a mini campaign as basically normally a one project campaign. It could be part of a comprehensive campaign or perhaps a leftover part of a campaign that never got fully funded. And for example, I'm working on a mini campaign now, which is for $50 million for scholarships and bursaries here at St. FX. But a mini campaign could be for, say, a couple of $1 million. But there's one, I view this as being just one particular project or 2 projects that's very focused. Feel free to ask questions as we move along, and Tara will control that part of the agenda as she pointed out. There'll be time for questions at the end, I hope. And then I've also post my email address so that if there's anything comes up that you'd like to discuss further, please feel free to send me an email, and then perhaps we could either do by email or even hook up by phone and so on. So let us begin with this project, in that it's easy to say that to do a campaign, it's really necessary to ensure that you have really 100% buy-in from your president, your CEO, board, and development committees. Oftentimes, people will suggest we need a campaign for such and such, but unless you've got your top executives 100% behind it, you're not going to have success. And then you really have to test your constituencies. And I think I'm talking mostly to people in the university, college, academic sphere, but if others are there, make sure you test your constituency, your faculty, staff, for instance, or any of your key supporters, business leaders, and the community if you're expecting support there. I can't emphasize the importance of planning. It's absolutely critical to plan in order to get absolute success. And depending on your structure, some departments are larger than others, and bear with me, I will try to formulate my words so that it kind of will be present whether you're small. So we're talking about planning, and planning committees are very helpful. Steering committees are helpful. And in the beginning, you really should identify what your strengths and weaknesses are, because most know what the strengths are, but sometimes the weaknesses are not so evident. And if there are some, be sure that you know how to deal with them or how to work around them. And I think everyone has certain aspects of anything they're trying to do where there are some, shall we say, weaknesses or difficult areas that you have to cope with. Once you get this done, you need to prepare a case for support. That's what you're going to take out in a feasibility study, and that's what you're going to test on your constituency to ensure that there is really support for this mini campaign. Now, the planning and resources, of course, that are required, and all of you know this, but you really need to have a committed budget to your project, and you have to have adequate staff. Sometimes these are driven directly from your development office, and if you get staff to do that and focus on that campaign, that's fine. But if you don't, I think it's really crucial that you try to get adequate resources so that when they get up in the morning, the only thing they're thinking about is this mini campaign, and they're not getting distracted with all the other things that go on in an office, because we can get distracted so easily. And often we will defer to the stuff that's the easiest things to do. And of course, we know that the difficult stuff gets easily shoved aside because we're always busy. But we always have to try to stay focused on getting rid of the stuff that's really difficult and that's kind of bogging us down and holding us back. Depending on the size, of course, it's great if we could have some research assistance so that when the out and help us with finding new prospects and so on. We're going to be preparing proposals and booklets and so on. So we really need someone to help us with writing, our communications and graphic design. And then we need to have a space to work out of, whether it be a small office or a place that can be just dedicated strictly to the campaign.
Ian,
yes.
Ian, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to double check. Have you moved from your title slide yet?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. Just wanted to make sure that everything was working order.
Yeah. So, so anyway, we're going to get to. I talked about my planning and then the resources. I got kind of right into this, but prospect identification is really what you need in order to win a campaign. Without good prospects, you can't win a campaign. And as you see here, where do you identify prospects? Well, you look at your current donors. You look at people with an interest in your cause. You look at people who may benefit from your project, people who support the cause, people who are wealthy, the organizations who are looking for a similar cause. So prospect identification is so important. And then from that, after we know who our prospects are, we'll put together a feasibility study, because the feasibility study will then outline what it is you're wanting to do. And then you're going to approach a cross-section of supporters and opinion leaders just to determine if you can win this campaign. And I really think it's important that you not cherry pick your supporters, opinion leaders, but you get a real good cross-section so you get a good, honest point of view. And as well, you'll use perhaps an independent body to do this so that the people that they're discussing this with will feel at ease to really tell them what's honest and true. Because there's nothing worse than getting information that's really not as valid as it should be, and then away you go off on planning a campaign that really there may not be the support that's required to win it. You want to talk about the timing of a campaign and really determine in this feasibility study how much it seems that you're able to raise. And through this study, hopefully identify who some of the major prospects would be. Now, assuming you're getting a positive response, and of course, there are those on the call that I'm sure have run into some challenges in campaigns, and in other campaigns they've moved along nicely. But you'll then, this case for support, which we prepared initially, it may be tweaked a bit after we're hearing from our constituency that there's certain things that we think we would like to raise money for. The support is just not there. And from this, then you're going to start to roll out your collateral materials. So you need a booklet, of course, to promote what you're going to do. And you start working at building a kind of a basic proposal that can be tailored to various constituencies and various prospects. And awfully important, too, to have proper volunteer guidelines so that the volunteers, and I'm going to get to that volunteer portion in a couple of more slides. It's so important that the volunteers are very well schooled in what is expected of them and how they go about to do their job. And of course, a tax giving guide, and is there any recognition for the giving? We know that it's not always the tax breaks that motivate people to give. It's more the interest in a project that will determine who's going to participate, and the tax savings is kind of a bonus. The other thing that becomes so important today, of course, is the website that will have to be prepared, because today there is so much done online and in websites and so on. So whereas years ago we really depended so much on print material and paper, while it's necessary, it may not be as critical as it is today when you need to have a very well-developed website. And it's there where you'd insert your campaign booklets and you'd have other kinds of information that is readily available. And of course, everyone today is very conscious about being more green and not wasting paper. But so then, as we're moving along, we really need to look at a qualified prospect pool. And I find it's always been so helpful if you can have various meetings in different areas where you're going to be canvassing, and pull people around the table to discuss possible prospects and to determine what it is that they perhaps are in a position to do. Now, those prospects could be those that are associated with the organization, those who have, have an interest in the cause, those who have demonstrated an interest in a similar cause, or just generally friends of the organization that perhaps when called upon would be supportive. Once you get this prospect pool, it's awfully important then to start evaluating what you think their giving potential is. And you do this by looking at perhaps what their giving history to other organizations have been, or to your organization. Do they make other charitable gifts? Have they supported similar projects? It may be that they're not a donor to your particular organization, but if they supported a similar project, then with the right person approaching them, they may take an interest in your project. Your research staff should research their net worth. And the other great place for information, of course, is to ask some of their friends who have a better idea of perhaps what they really have a capacity to give than you can find in doing your research. We talked about why people make charitable gifts. I said earlier, it's not always the tax break that motivates them, but obviously it's to support an important cause or to support a community. Some may just want to establish a new relationship with an organization, or just because the person who makes the ask. And that becomes so important about who it is that is approaching someone to get involved. Now, we've always heard that fundraising is about relationships and people give to people. And in my experience, that is so true. I've come across people who really may not have had much to do with an organization, but the right person can really get them engaged. And I draw your attention to the 5 R's of asking for a gift. And it comes down to the right person asking the right person at the right time for the right amount for the right project. And, when you think about that, it really resonates back to people giving to people and how we're going to maximize this particular aspect of the campaign. And so often I've had that experience where I've had planning meetings or distribution of proposals for various people. And there'll be 2 or 3 people who will say, well, I know John, and someone else will say, well, I know him. And I really like to drill down deeper and say, okay, how do you really know this person? And do you think they'd respond to you at the highest level when you ask them for a gift? And of course, it comes down to asking people of a similar status as yourself for that amount. A person who has a capacity for, say, $1,000 is probably not the right person to ask somebody for $100,000 unless they got a really close personal relationship. So then we move on to volunteer recruitment. Now, the steps that your organization might take might be a little bit different than how I'm unfolding this, but I wanted to develop the prospect pool and people that are interested in the cause. And from that, we would start trying to draw our volunteers. And oftentimes, it really needs to be the president or CEO who's involved in recruiting your campaign chair. Because that's the president or CEO is really your chief fundraiser. You could have vice presidents, or you have directors of development, or campaign directors, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's really the president or CEO who is the chief of the campaign, and the others are really supportive and subordinate. Now, in that recruitment, of course, you would take guidance from the president or CEO. Would certainly take guidance from the development staff, and it would probably would have one of those people accompany them on that visit to the volunteer to ask them to be campaign chair, because in that particular call, the development staff would be that much more versed and briefed on the kinds of things that the potential chair might be asking with regard to what kind of resources and support is the university or the organization going to provide to the campaign chair, things that perhaps the president isn't that deep into all the nitty-gritties that could answer those questions properly. So making that request and call, you really need to go well prepared with proper information at a time that's convenient for the person you're approaching as well. You want to be sure that it's not kind of a quick in, quick out type of thing. It's because that campaign volunteer chair can be so critical to the rest of the campaign, because then you're depending on that person to start building your campaign volunteer team as we move down the line, whether you need vice chairs or division chairs or canvassers or whatever. And of course, the size of the campaign volunteer team is really incumbent upon how many calls you've got to make. And so when you're looking at the volunteer commitment, the first thing, of course, is you want to be sure that the volunteer can make a personal commitment at their own personal level. And while we know that they may appear to be very wealthy, some of them may have other commitments to other organizations. They may have family members they're supporting and so on. So those of us who worked in fundraising and development for a long time realize that you can't always read a book by its cover. You've got to kind of go down a couple layers, and oftentimes they'll share with you where their financial resources are going that perhaps people didn't really know. But if you're asking them to make the best personal gift they can, I think that's a real win. Again, they're going to wonder about the time commitment that's required, and so on. And of course, again, they'll come back to, well, what kind of support and help am I going to receive from your development team? It's incumbent upon the chairs and vice chairs, of course, to then attract additional volunteers. We often think that you never want a volunteer to have to make any more than 5 or 7 calls, because you don't want it to be too onerous and excuse me, and then all of a sudden calls aren't getting made. So the other thing that's important too is in closing the call, and I'll talk about that in a couple of more slides, and also reporting back to your captain or your vice chair, or whoever you're reporting to, reporting back on your results, because you really have to track whether you're having success. And you may have to reach out and say, listen, I'm having some real challenges with this particular person, and the captain or vice chair may agree to go on a call with you. Or it may come that you may say, listen, I wonder if someone else would have better success approaching that person. So you've got to be flexible. The bottom line is that you have to try to ensure that everyone who seems to be a good prospect is approached properly, and every effort is made to get them committed and involved in the campaign. Volunteers, as I mentioned earlier, it's so important for them to be trained properly. And I always like to have an orientation training meeting and you'll have to maybe schedule several, because it's not always convenient for everybody to get to a particular time or place. So you may have to schedule several of them. But I like to be able to go and give everybody a real good overview of the campaign and what it's to achieve, who's getting involved, how it's going to make a difference in the organization, and so on. And then outline timelines. I would go with a slideshow so that you set out a campaign timeline, because I think people want to know that there's an end to this commitment. If they see that it's something you're going to try to do as efficiently and quickly as possible, I think they're more inclined to participate. We all know, though, that campaigns never end as quickly as you would hope, and there's always reasons for them to drag on. But again, if you at least outline some type of a timeline that you're shooting towards, it gives you a bit of a roadmap. Again, at that training meeting, you stress the importance of making personal financial commitments to the best of their ability. I like to demonstrate how to make a solicitation call and how to close the deal. It's so important that it's one thing to make a call, but it's another thing to close the deal. And I'm going to talk about that as we move along a little further. And again, the importance of timely follow-up, so that if you're telling your volunteer that if you tell someone you're going to follow up in a week or 2 weeks or whatever, make sure you follow up. And if it was even that they wanted you to find out more information for them, even if you're having difficulty getting information, at least get back to them so that you'll know that you haven't forgot about them, and so on. And then finally, again, getting back to the importance of reporting results and reporting how you got along with the particular call. Now, I have another little, I'm going to go into a small, hello?
Yep, we're still here. And there is a question, Ian, if you have a moment.
Sure, go for it.
The question is, what do you include in your tax giving guide?
Well, that's a good question, because each province is a bit different. So if it's a national campaign or involving several provinces, I would ensure that the federal part is standard, but your provincial taxes change. So if I'm doing a campaign in Ontario, for instance, I'll have a tax giving guide specific to Ontario, and I'll have one specific to Nova Scotia or whatever province we're working in. The other thing I do is I always put a disclaimer on it that this is strictly a guide, and I always ask people to consult with their tax advisors for confirmed information. So it's used as just a guide, so that generally speaking, that if they're going to make a $1,000 commitment after taxes, it probably should only cost them about $600 type of thing. And of course, there's other fundamental stuff we could get into with regard to other ways to give, whether it be gifts of stock or other kinds of vehicles, flow-through share vehicles, and so on. But those get very complicated. But from strictly a tax for a giving away, generally I deal with it as a cash gift. And then if it's a gift of stock, of course, we know there's special treatment for capital gains. But you have to be fairly, use this as a general guide, as specific as I would get with anything I distribute.
Perfect. Thank you.
Is that good?
I think so.
Okay. I have a little couple of slides here that I compare winning any kind of a campaign and soliciting a gift, particularly getting a prospect, is like planning a fundraising, like planning a garden. And I've got a slide here showing, say, a garden that's unattended. And then if we cultivate the soil and plant the seeds and fertilize and water and weed, this is what we get. And so a garden that receives attention shows good results. And so when we're talking about cultivating a gift, that's why I like to compare it to planting a garden. If you have fertile soil, then it's the right prospect. If the soil is fertile, and you're then basically through the first gate. But if the soil is sour and you need to sweeten the soil, you need to till it up, you need to remove the weeds. So what you're doing here is you're really trying to deal with any bad feelings. So you start to add fertilizer, which invite them to an event. Add a little water, which would be sending them some information. And then you might want to add a little bit more fertilizer and water, for instance. So the other thing you have to remember, though, is in dealing with them, not too much, because you know that if you water a plant too much or give it too much fertilizer, you can kill it. So you have to find the right balance. And then, of course, you pray for sun, which we like showing an interest in participating. As you work on them, you might want to invite them to an event with friends who are committed to the campaign. So they'll have some people that they could perhaps speak with and feel comfortable with. You could use the friends to convey their support, so that they'll know that their friends are committed to this campaign. You'd also want the friends to perhaps say why they are giving, and this is helping set the bar for what you're perhaps wanting them to consider. So all along, when you're going through these various steps, your prospect is learning about the organization from people that they trust. So when you get the prospect to the point where you feel it's time to make an approach, then you're going to talk about setting up an appointment at perhaps a private location. You want to confirm who will be attending. So you want to be sure. I always like to ensure that we invite spouses or partners, because in many situations where people are married, for example, or there's other business associates or so on, you should never take for granted you're speaking to the right person, because you should involve both if where possible. And bring with you a package that can convey some information you want to leave with them. You want to give them the case for support. You want to perhaps have a proposal outlining the ask, and that would include related information, tax giving guides, and so on. And then you'd have a personalized pledge form. Now, the thing before you go to make this ask, of course, is that you want to make sure you have the right people involved. So whether it's the lead volunteer or you involve the president or staff, and according to the size of the call, if it's a major ask, a leadership ask, then it's really important to pull the team that's going to make the approach together for just a bit of a rehearsal and a presentation, and make sure that everybody is ready to go and know who's going to lead the ask, and then when someone else is going to perhaps come in with some expert information and so on. It's important to confirm the meeting with the person you're approaching, the location, travel time, and parking, so that you're on time. They're so important that you can't be late for it all. You want to, when you arrive, give yourself a few minutes to collect yourself, collect your thoughts, and be sure you thank them for taking time to meet with you. I like to always ask right up front how much time we have for the meeting, so you know what you're dealing with. The person might only have 20 minutes or half an hour, or they may have lots of time. It's always nice to open with some small talk to kind of break the ice, but not too much. You're there for a purpose, and I like to keep that breaking the ice to 1 or 2 minutes, unless it's the prospect that's leading the discussion, and then you really move into your presentation. And again, if you're using a volunteer, be sure that they're a donor, and never be late, as I mentioned, and so on. So just click this. Okay, so then when you begin your presentation, really be confident, be upbeat. Feel that this is really important to you. It's important to the president. I'd always like to talk about how well the university or the organization is doing. Talk about the successes. Talk about the vision. Talk about our needs. And then say you brought along some presentation of materials. And lay that all out before you make the ask. And then when you make the ask, it's so important then to remain silent and wait for the prospect to respond. And you're hoping that they're going to respond in a minute or two or whatever. But if they don't, then you of course come back and say, is there anything about this presentation that perhaps you need more information, more clarification? We feel that the ask was appropriate on our consideration and discussions we've had, but if we're way off base, please tell us. The important thing is that you participate at the level that makes you feel good, and reiterate the importance of getting a gift from them, and how important it is for them to make a commitment. Make sure that you know that you allow them to have an extended pledge period if that's what's required. Oftentimes, if you're looking for a bigger gift, you're looking for maybe a 5 or perhaps 7 year period. But in some cases today, with leadership gifts, they may want to extend them 10 years. I think that those are always arrangements that are possible. But I think what you want to do is be as flexible as possible for them to participate. And if they say, well, it may take me a year or two before I'm able to make my first payment, I think that's fine. You have to be flexible. But when you're making the ask, when the prospect says yes, it's awfully important to get the pledge in writing. We all know that. And if you have the pledge form with you, if you can get it filled out then and signed, terrific. If not, prepare one and get it back to them and confirm what was discussed in the meetings. You have to always be gracious, and if at the end of the call the prospect says no, still be gracious. Thank them for taking time to meet with you. My experience is that no does not mean never. It may mean not now. And then go back and kind of review after the call the 5 R's. So maybe it wasn't the right person that was involved, or maybe the timing was not right, or the amount wasn't right. So after every visit, it's so important to kind of do a postmortem. And if you achieved everything you went after, tremendous. If you didn't, then evaluate it. It may be that, you know what, the timing was not good. We asked for too much. There might be other extenuating circumstances, and just try to learn from that call so that, the next time we're making calls, we're perhaps a little bit more effective or efficient. If you're making the call, follow up, of course, I can't stress it enough. If the president or a campaign chair doesn't happen to be involved in that particular call, it's important to inform them immediately thereafter that you did make the call and what the results were. Again, stressing the importance of follow-up, sending a thank you message to them for the meeting, and confirming in writing what was committed during that meeting as well. The commitments from both parties, if there's an amount that they've agreed to in a time frame, get that done. And if there's other things that you as a volunteer in the organization promise to do, outline that in your follow-up correspondence so that everyone knows what's expected. And again, prompt thank yous are so important. And again, if you get the gift, call the donor again in a month or two, just to say, listen, I just want to call and thank you very much for that gift. It's been so helpful to us, and it's in fact encouraged others to contribute. And as you move along as well, keep them updated on the progress of the campaign. And remind them of perhaps other events that may not be able to come, but at least you want them to stay connected with you, and always feel that now they're part of the organization, because it's so important that donors feel that they are part of any organization, and share with them the successes, share with them how their gift has made a difference in what you're doing, and that's kind of the way I think we have to continue every day. And stewardship is a continuous thing. Oftentimes people are not as attentive to it in years after the gift. I think it's important perhaps to invite them back to events. In several years, send them annual reports. Let them know how the project that they've contributed to is making a difference in the organization. So I flipped through my slides quite efficiently. I'm sure it's raised questions, and I'm certainly open to taking any questions that you may have. And I encourage you perhaps to contact me by email at any time should anything come up with regard to what I've presented today. If you wish to have a phone discussion, I'm more than welcome that as well. And I'm sure I can learn a lot from what you have to offer as well. There's no one that knows everything about fundraising. I think it's kind of a living organism that we learn every day. We have to learn by our missteps so that we are better when we make our next approach. And we try to learn what it is that motivates donors to give. So I'll stop there and open the floor for questions if there are any.
Great, thanks, Ian. So as a reminder to folks, lines are muted, so we're asking that you make use of the chat box and the Q&A option. And so as those are being formed, we do have a question that has come in. Ian, how do you manage simultaneous concurrent mini campaigns?
Well, that's again, it can be challenging, and of course, one of the biggest challenges, of course, is making sure that your prospects are well managed, so that you're not going after the same prospect for two different. The two campaigns have to kind of agree on who your prospects are, and you want to ensure that you're not tripping over each other. I think that's one of the things, of course, when you do a comprehensive campaign, that you have various projects you put in front of a donor, and then you let them decide which direction they're going in. But again, it's so important for your development team to be coordinated and to keep each other informed as they move forward.
Perfect. Ian, is it ever a strategy to sort of go with a sheet or a sell sheet if folks just want to be involved, if you're not sure how deep the prospecting has gone on an individual, to say here are some of the options to which you can be involved in Sanifax?
Explain that again, Tara. I just want to be clear.
Do you ever approach a donor with a prospect with multiple options to how they can be involved? Because it sounds like you specifically go per each mini campaign.
Oh no, we give them as options as well. And I was today focusing, for instance, when my focus has been to try to raise $50 million for scholarships and bursaries, because it was one of the visions of our president, Kent MacDonald, when he took office, that he wanted to ensure that there were scholarships and bursaries available for students who couldn't normally afford to come to university. And so to raise $50 million for that project. But oftentimes when I would be meeting with donors, I wouldn't use that as a mutually exclusive call. I would want them to know that there are tell them about the other important things that are going on in the university, because they may have more of an interest in supporting our athletic complex as opposed to scholarships. So it's always to try to ensure that the donors' interests are being best served. And I'm always cognizant of being sure that I want to know what it is that the donor is most interested in.
Great, thank you. As a reminder for folks, these webinars are recorded, so they will not be distributed automatically after the session, but should you wish to receive a copy of the recording, you can contact myself or our admin team. So some questions did come in. What software do you use to track your campaign and donor conversation progress?
We're using Salesforce, and it's, I guess, I don't know if there's any perfect system, but that's what we have been using. Our main frame is the Banner information technology system, where we load all our pledges, gifts, and stuff in there. So between those two platforms, that's how we try to manage our data information.
Great. Is that the same that you would use for donor research?
Yes, it is. It is. We have a researcher that everything that she's finding is going into Salesforce, and it's actually quite comprehensive. And so when we're going off to meet with a group of people, she'll provide briefing notes for each of those individuals, and we keep building a database of our top prospects to keep us up to date on what they're involved in and what their net worth is and all sorts of stuff like that, that we hold very confidential. And we don't distribute that at all very widely, but it's in the hands of those that really need to be informed properly before they meet with a prospect.
Perfect. And so in conjunction with that, you did mention a prospect researcher. So how many people in your department are responsible for this?
We have one full-time researcher, and we have a development team of about 10 people. And we now have two people working external from the institution. We have one based in Halifax and one based now in Toronto that are our full-time senior development officers and major gift officers in those two cities, external from Antigonish.
Perfect. So that's what we had in queue. So if you have a follow-up to one of the questions you've already answered, please go ahead and follow up in the Q&A or the chat box. We'll give folks another moment or two to formulate and type some of those questions. And we'll see what comes in. It won't be long. As we wait for that, Ian, anything that you had wanted to share with folks? Maybe one last tip or such as we may be coming to the end of the webinar?
Well, I appreciate having this opportunity to kind of share some of my ideas and thoughts with regard to fundraising. I guess some would say it's an art and others would say it's a science because there's so much technology and so much involved today. But it's all about relationships and the importance of developing those relationships, nurturing them, and I can't stress enough the importance of sending a person off a quick little email message to say hello, or to pick up the phone and call and ask them how they're doing. Because there's nothing worse than a prospect telling you that the only time I see you is when you're looking for something or you're asking for money. I like to try to create a situation with our prospects so that when we meet with them, they're asking, what is it I can do to help you? And to me, that's kind of the ultimate that I strive for. You can't do with everybody, but certainly those that you think you can nurture and you want to draw them closer to the institution. It's so important to invite them to campus to visit and tour and to visit with students. It's important for your scholarship and bursary winners to send personal thank you notes to the donors. Let them know that their gifts and the endowments they've established have been so important in helping them get a degree. So, I mean, getting a gift is one thing. Storing that gift properly is so important, and it's critical to ensure that the donor feels appreciated, and that the donor is also feeling that they want to give again. And it's like anybody can perhaps sell a car, but it's a service that gets people coming back to the same dealership. And I find that stewardship is just service after the sale.
Great. A few questions did come in while you were chatting, and I think you may have covered a few of them,
Sure.
but we can go through them again.
Sure.
So one of the questions is what tools do you use to find a prospect's net worth, etc.? So I think you touched on some of them, but if you could elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, I wish I knew the exact name of the tool, because our researcher does have several tools that one of them she's using is a database that publicly lists all the major gifts that are given by wealthy people to every charitable organization in Canada on a monthly basis. And every month or two, I'll get a report that shows where a certain person made a $500,000 gift to a hospital or to a university or whatever. She has another couple of tools, and pardon me that I don't know the exact name of these tools, whereby she can research a person's net worth. And of course, it has to be publicly traded stuff, because that's the only where you find it. But she's very good in at least giving us some idea. It's not 100% accurate, because, but she'll search perhaps the value of their homes and where they're located, those kinds of things.
Great. Perhaps to the individual who posed that question, you can email Ian offline, and if there's specifics, Ian, maybe you could loop the person who asked that question directly to the prospect researcher.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Sure.
Great. So a few more questions that came in. Some of them you did touch regarding donor recognition's components of the campaign,
Sure.
And if you could provide some examples of effective ideas.
Of donor recognition?
Correct, components of the campaign.
Sure. Well, often it's structured to the size of the gift, and whether it be a naming opportunity on a building, a room, a park, a name scholarship, a name fellowship. So sometimes they want to have a name on something. Other times that's not important to them. We had one donor recently give a $3 million gift to name a chair in honor of a professor that he had a tremendous amount of respect for. He didn't want his name associated with it at all, but he thought this professor was so outstanding that that's what he wanted to do. So that was quite a wonderful thing to have happened. We do some recognition stuff for lifetime giving. So anyone who's given a gift of $100,000 gets honored as a Xaverian patron at our president's dinner each year. And then we also recognize consecutive giving. So people who belong to the President's Club at various levels get recognized for 10 or 20 consecutive years of giving. But we charge them to come to the dinner. It's not a free dinner, except the year you're being honored. If you're being honored for 20 years of giving, then you're a guest. But for all those that come to the President's dinner, it's not a free dinner anymore. It was until even many people felt that you shouldn't be using university money to provide dinners for donors. So that's what we do. But it's primarily naming opportunities, whether it be buildings, rooms, parks, scholarships, bursaries, endowments, chairs, and so on.
Great. So a question regarding driving folks from the pipeline for your mini campaign. Is someone responsible to make sure they get through from identification to stewardship?
Yeah, we have a prospect management committee that meets monthly, and our researcher will she initially produced their list of our top 1,500 prospects, and so then we review that, and then on a monthly basis, she will come forward with new prospects for us to consider, and we will discuss who they're to be assigned to, and where we think their area of interest is, and so on. And that's an ongoing process. And if we have prospects that are assigned to a particular development officer, and there's not much movement there, then they can be moved to another development officer, or there may be reasons why perhaps we would remove them from the list possibly. So we do that on an ongoing basis.
Great. Thank you. That does cover the questions that are in the queue. So I'll give folks a quick last moment to see if there's anything that hasn't been answered. We're almost at time. So Ian, thank you for being open and sharing with folks what's going on within the campaign and from your expertise. Ian's information is on the screen, and as he did say, he is open to questions. Should you wish to follow up with him directly regarding any of these items, systematic, execution, or strategic. Ian, any last thoughts before we adjourn the session for today?
Well, no, I just wish everyone well in their fundraising endeavors. I know that it's a challenging business, and I like to always celebrate our victories and not get too down when we don't get the gift we're after. I remember, I'll give you one quick story to end, because there was a prospect who had many years told me that he was going to build a building for us. And so I had an opportunity to approach him for a significant gift that I had a donor was prepared to match. So I thought he was the right person to ask for a 7-digit gift. And so couple of things happened. On the way to the lunch we were going to have, he informed me that someone else was joining us that day. So I thought, okay, that's not going to allow me any time to make an ask at the lunch. And so we're driving along, and I'm talking about the project, and I said, I'm going to come right up. So I asked him for $1 million and told him how it could be matched and so on, and he just said no. And I thought, okay. So I said, well, how about $500,000? He said no. I said, okay. So we had lunch. It was lovely. And we got back to the hotel, and we chatted some more, and we had a lovely lunch, and we're great friends. And so I said, you couldn't do $1 million or $500,000, but surely you can consider $250,000. And he said, what part of this no don't you understand? And I thought, okay, I think I've gone too far. So anyway, thank him very much. And I go into the hotel, and I'm really feeling awful. I thought, boy, I pushed this too far. So I stewed over it for a day or two, and then I thought, no, I got to call him on the phone, and I got to apologize for being so aggressive, and so on. And so when I called, he was delighted to hear from me. I started apologizing, and he said, "You had nothing to apologize for." He said, "You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing." And I was really quite impressed that you were not wanting to take no for an answer. So I came back and I said, "Okay, so you reconsider. You give us a gift." And he laughed and he says, "No." He said, "I didn't like you." And but anyways, since that time, we've had success with that person. But you know, you sometimes have to know when to back off, and timing is important sometimes. But in other cases, you know, you really think you've got a top prospect and it just doesn't work out. And I just say, well, you know what? I'm really grateful that that person would share a meeting with me, would at least consider what I was asking, and thank them very much for taking time and keep in touch with them. So let's celebrate our victories. Don't get down with when people refuse to support us, and just move on.
Well, perfect. I think that's great advice to end on, especially the last e-learning session of the 2018-2019 series. So thank you, Ian, for closing on that, especially remembering that we need to celebrate victories big and small. So thank you very much to you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Following the session, you will be receiving an email with an evaluation. I do strongly ask that you fill that out. Mostly questions regarding the session today, as well as some questions that will help CCA build future programming. It takes a quick moment. And again, if you have any questions, I do urge you to get in touch with Ian. If you would like to review this presentation again or share it with any of your colleagues, it is available in our archive to CCA members. I wish you all a lovely afternoon. And for the most part of you, I do hope to see you in June at the CCA National Conference in the National Capital Region. And we're about 6 weeks away. So thanks, everyone. Have a lovely end of your day, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks again, Ian.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.